Hello, it's Lee from Strata Miniatures. I've been asked to do a quick tutorial on the best way to stick together metal miniatures, as I'm sure that most of you are now starting to receive your models. I've had a few people ask me, would you mind showing us or telling us the best way to get these models to glue together so that they don't fall apart, and you can game with them, you can put them on display. I think someone said they wanted to use them for plant decorations, so on and so forth. So for whatever you're going to use them for, we can get a really good solid miniature that is going to be reliable and isn't going to fall apart. With regards to sort of tools and the type of glue you're going to use, I'll start with the type of glue. It's just a standard super glue. I get mine in these small bottles. They come in all shapes and sizes. The one thing that you want is to have a lot of control, because we're not going to use a lot of glue. And that's one of the basic rules that we're going to go through today. So yeah, any sort of glue will do that's a super glue, as long as it's designed to glue metal to metal, or in the case of the model to the base. Usually if it's a super glue or some kind of contact adhesive, it will also stick your metal miniature to your base as well. So you can use it for both. Other basic tools. Now, I'm not going to use anything fancy to do these. I'm assuming that, if you're at home and you are doing this for the first time, you might not want to be spending, hundreds of pounds on fancy tools to do different things. And there are tools out there that do all sorts, and I will sort of reference them. But these are all really basic things that you'll either have lying around the house, or you can go down to a cheap store and pick up for a pound or two, basically. So to start with, I'll run through the tools. These are some clippers. As you can see, I'm using some really old ones. I have got some nice ones because I glue a lot of miniatures together. But I wanted to show you, you don't have to have anything particularly fancy. This is a really old pair. I think this is probably nearly 15, 20 years old, this pair. And they're absolutely fine to use. Some kind of scalpel or hobby knife. Obviously be really careful with these because they're very sharp. So just take care if you're using them for any reason. Knives are really useful tool to have at your disposal. For other metal miniatures, you may well need a drill to do what they call pinning, which is where you would put a piece of metal running between a metal, like a paper clip or a bit of brass rod between 2 points to strengthen it. But for these miniatures, you're not going to need this. And one of the other things that I always keep are offcuts of and used bits of sandpaper. So usually when you go and you use a piece of sandpaper, if you're doing some DIY, there's usually quite a lot of very good sandpaper left over around the edges. So this piece is very cracked around the center where I've been rubbing down walls. But these little areas around the edge are absolutely perfect, and they're the right size to use on our miniatures. So you can stick them onto things like lollipop sticks, almost like a sanding block, which is really useful, or coffee stirrers. But for the purposes of this, I'm just going to use it as it is to show you don't need to do an awful lot. That's it with the tools, so we're really going to get going. Now, I just wanted to run through a few basics with regards to these miniatures. So for the most part, they come with a leg and chair section and a torso and head section. This is kind of the main part of the miniature, so we're going to concentrate on doing that at first. I've got loads of bits available, different bits here that we can have a little mess around with, and I can show you a few different things. The easiest miniature to stick together of the lot, if you're starting this for the first time and you're thinking, right, I want to start with the easiest one to stick together first, I would say that the Dwarf Barbarian is by far the best choice for your starting run, simply because he's slightly thicker set, which means you've got a bigger surface area, so that when you're gluing the miniature, it's far easier to get that contact nice and solid. So yeah, and then in order from the easiest to the hardest, it would be the dwarf would be the easiest, and then probably the tiefling, and then the rogue, which I've got in pieces here, and probably the trickiest to stick together. So if you've got a few of them, this would be the last one that you do, would be the druid. And the only reason she's slightly trickier than the others is because she has a hand joint, whereas all the others have their arms attaching either at the shoulder or they're fixed as part of the miniature. So I've been asked why they're in bits by a couple of people, and just to explain, when you make metal miniatures, they get put into molds, and we try to keep this down to as fewer pieces as possible. But with the way that metal spins through a mold, you do have to break the miniature up to get clean casts. And, you know, I hope you agree that the casts have come out absolutely amazing. And, you know, in terms of detail, they're fantastic. So, yeah, that's the reason why they come in parts. It's purely because of the manufacturing process. And what we're going to do to start with is talk about what the aim of gluing a model together is. And that's really important. So when you first get a miniature, you should look at it for the end goal, which is ultimately to paint it. So even if that's just spraying it a standard color, you know, even if we're just going to spray it gold and use it as an ornament, what you want to do is look at the miniature and say, okay, what's going to obscure detail? So on all of these miniatures, the wheels will obscure detail. And in some cases, the pole arm might on the tiefling perhaps, but it's not a massive concern. So what you want to decide to start with is, do you want to stick the wheels on before you paint it? From my perspective, if I was going to be painting a competition piece and spending 100 hours painting a miniature, then I would leave the wheels off, paint it in sub-assemblies, and then put it together at the end. If you're just using them as gaming pieces, for the most part, the wheels won't cover up or detract from any main part of the miniature. So you can paint them quite comfortably without actually with sticking the wheels on, as opposed to leaving them off. That's totally down to personal choice. You have to be very careful if you're painting all the parts first, then gluing together, because super glue does have a tendency to stain the different areas around the miniature. So you can get a bit of misting or fogging around an area where you're gluing. So just be really careful with that. The only thing I would recommend is not gluing them to their bases. The main reason being that if you're going to paint a miniature, what you want to really be able to access is the parts of the miniature that you can't access if they're stuck to the base. So in this case, stuff like the wheels and the rims and right the way around here, all of this kind of nice detail work, it's just much easier to paint if you can turn the miniature around. So a lot of people will glue their miniature to a piece of cork, for example, to paint it, and then they take it off and glue it onto the base afterwards. If you're going to paint it and assemble it with the base separately, there is a little thing that we need to make sure that you do right. But apart from that, we're going to talk about how you glue the model, and more importantly, how you prepare the surfaces. Because with metal models, it's all about preparation. The super glue, as long as you use the right amount, will always work. So preparing the surfaces are really, really, really important. And I've deliberately, where is that piece there, and also the rogue's legs here. So what I'm going to do is just show you the rogue. So all metal miniatures, when they're cast, will have some what they call flash on it. So when the metal miniature comes up, there will be some leftover little pieces of metal. These are all failed casts in effect. So we weren't happy with one part or another of them. So it's why they've not come out to you as a final miniature, basically. So so in terms of bits of flash, it might be something like this on the wheel. That's a casting point that we might need to clean up. Sometimes you get little bits of flash. Let me just get it to zoom in. Just sticking off the ends, and you can just about see a piece there. If you look just at where the armrest is. Again, all these little areas you clean up before you get going. The most important areas to pay a lot of attention to are the contact points. So every single model that comes in two pieces like this will have a ball and socket joint. So if I just bring in, there's the ball and there's the socket. What you need to do is make sure that all of this surface is flat and clean. If you can see here where I'm tapping, you can probably see a tiny little bit of metal. And what that will do is, when we try and put these two pieces together, like this, it may not look like much, but there will be a very small gap. Now, it's okay. You could stick it together like that, but what you're doing is you're reducing the surface area where the two surfaces are going to join, so it will be weaker than if you prepare it properly. And also from a painting perspective, you don't want a big gap running around the miniature that you're going to have to fill with some kind of two-part putty or There are other products like liquid green stuff, for example, or Milliput that people use to fill gaps. So we can avoid a lot of that just by preparing the area. So as I said, on the Rogue's torso, where the ball is, there is a little bit of metal sticking up, and I think you can just about see it there. So this is where you need to start using some of the different tools. So clippers are good for going through quite large pieces. So unless you've got very expensive clippers, it won't do this job for you because you won't get quite close enough. But when you use clippers, just so you're aware, there's a flat side and there's an angled side to the blade. Basically, if you're going to use the clippers for any reason, you want the flat side to touch the surface that you're cutting. So what you'll end up with is a very clean cut when you pull the handles together. For something like this, I would use either a file if you've got a set of very small files, metal files, or you can use a blade like this. You need to be very, very careful with these. They're very sharp, very easy to cut yourself. So when you're cutting, try and use the miniature to your advantage to stop you from slipping. And also, you don't need to apply a lot of pressure. So it's always worth, you'd rather use too little pressure and not slip and cut yourself than use too much, go straight through the metal in one go and end up cutting yourself, which, it's not a good thing. So what you want to be doing is, in this case, the arm drops slightly lower at the elbow here. So I'm going to use that as a bit of protection. So if I'm going to hold this miniature, I'm not going to be putting my thumb up here. I'm going to be holding it on the side here so that if I do slip, I will hit the metal first. I'd rather take a little tiny nick out of this than cut my finger open. So just take it really, really carefully. You haven't got to push down hard on this metal. It's very soft. So what we're going to do is, that's where it is, if you can see where the blade is just cutting in there. So we're going to slowly, and you only need the slightest bit of pressure. And I don't know if you can see on the end of the blade there. It's come away that easily. So you just keep going very slowly like that until you've got a really flat surface. And once you're happy that it's really flat, really smoothed off, and that's absolutely fine, what you'll find is when we then place the two parts together again, you get a much, 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 much cleaner connection. Okay, now, it's very hard to do with the camera in front of me, but hopefully you can see the gap before was slightly bigger, almost like this. But now, when we put the two pieces together, they fit together almost perfectly. So in terms of preparation, you check the rest of the miniature in terms of the chair here. So I mentioned there are some little tiny bits of flash that are coming off here. Look, there's one there just on the end. I don't know if I can flick this up and show you. There's a tiny little bit where the blade is there, basically. So again, be really careful when you're doing this. Always try and cut away, and you use hardly any pressure. If it can get it on its end, just like this, see that little bit there that needs to come off? That's where something like a pair of clippers are perfect. And this is where you can basically, if I just put the clippers in, just nip that piece away and it's gone. I wouldn't worry too much about sanding any of these surfaces once you've prepared them properly and cut them with clippers or knives, unless there's a really obvious bump. What you don't want to be doing is sanding any part of the miniature unnecessarily, basically. We'll get to it in a minute where some good parts are to sand. There is another piece here. I won't bore you with doing the whole lot because there will be just a few. Again, we'll just nip that one off there. Perfect. Okay, so we've prepared, we'll assume that I've prepared the whole area properly. I've looked around the model. I've said, okay, there's no more little bits sticking up, because if you get those bits off now, when you undercoat the model, you're not going to end up with horrible marks that are really difficult to paint around, or having to take a piece off that's already been painted. That's about the worst thing that you can do, and you'll end up with a chip into the miniature. Prepare them, take your time, have a look through. In terms of gluing these together, so there are a few tricks that you can do, but fundamentally, the most important thing is to get a bigger surface area as possible, to touch a bigger surface area if possible on the joining part, and to not use too much super glue. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a miniature where someone has, by the looks of it, put some glue on. They've put the two parts together. It's not set properly because they've not left it long enough. And so they put more glue on because, in theory, I suppose it makes sense that you think more glue, stronger bond. It doesn't work that way with these type of contact glues. So what you actually want is a very thin surface of glue, and then you want to be holding the miniature together for 30 seconds or so until it appears to be set. Now, just because something appears to be set doesn't mean it is. So we'll get onto that after I've done this. But what I'm going to try and do, and it's quite hard to do this without actually just putting it straight onto the miniature. I'm going to try and show you how much glue I'm going to use by just gently squeezing and trying to, right, that is all that you need to glue that miniature. So what I do is I drop it into the little ball joint first, and then I use the end just to move it around a touch. You've got about 10 seconds before it really starts to dry. So you've got a little bit of working time. And then what you want to do is fit the miniature in like that. And you want to apply a very small amount of pressure. It hasn't got to be a lot, just enough to hold it in place. Try not to move the model from side to side. You'll feel when it's in the right position, it will, you can see, look, it will just slot in. So what you do is you hold that like that for 30 seconds, applying the same amount of pressure going down. There we go. Just have a little look around the model when you do it. It's quite hard to do with a camera in front of you, but what you'll find is sometimes it will look like it's glued in the right position like this, and it's not quite right. So it's always worth, I mean, this it's not glued properly, but I'll just try and show you. It's always worth just checking in some of these areas. See, it's not quite sat flush there. Basically, the model needs to go down and forwards a bit. So it's always worth checking, okay? Once it feels like it's going tacky and it's starting to dry, this is the most important piece of advice when gluing metal miniatures. Put the model down and leave it for 15-20 minutes. Now, I know you're thinking, yeah, but I'm going to be really excited when I get my model. I want to glue it straight together. I want to spray it and I want to get going. Honestly, if you leave it for 15 minutes, it will save you hours of the model falling apart and trying to put it back together again. So you'd leave that model there. You wouldn't touch it. If you've got other models to do, you can line them all up and move to the next one and to the next one and then go back to the beginning again. And by that time, the first one should have dried. So it's really important to leave them. Put them to one side. Don't feel that you have to mess around with it or try and stick other parts on, because if I try and put her arm and the wheel on now, what's going to happen is, although it feels a little bit dry, it's not. And what will happen is I'll knock the body off, then I have to put more glue on, and you'll end up with it running down the belt buckles, into her lap, around her legs. It'll obscure the detail and nobody likes that. So take your time with them, little bit of glue, let them dry. Really, really important. Now I'm going to just talk to you about the bases and the miniatures, because an easier one to show you this on is actually the Dwarf Barbarian. We've got him here and his base. You'll see on his base there are some pre-marked areas where the 4 inner wheels and the 2 bigger wheels will slot into. So what you want to do is check your fitting. So this should slot in almost perfectly, like that. Okay, great connection, easy to glue. So the problem is, if I try and assemble my model away from this base and I try and glue my wheel, the bigger wheel, in. So if I put this in here a second and I show you it, I have absolutely no idea whether that is going to align with the outside marks on this base. So use your base as a guide. I'm going to put the base down here, move these bits out of the way. Okay, what you would do is take your miniature. Obviously you test it first, dry fit everything, make sure it's a good fit, clean it all up. Here's one I prepared earlier, so it's fine. We'll put a little bit of glue. Again, not loads. I'll just see if I can show you. That is more than enough. Into there. Okay, now it won't dry immediately, so you've got a little bit of time to work. We'll put the wheel on and then use the base. Line up all of the bits that you need to go. Look at that, I got it right first time. That's the first time I think I've managed to do that. Okay, make sure you use the base as a guide so that you know when you come to sticking the model onto the base after you've painted it, you'll know that you're going to get a really good fit. It's going to be really easy to glue on. Again, once that has started to dry, 30 seconds or so, put it to one side and then come back and do the other side afterwards. Make sure that fits and you'll be absolutely spot on then when you come to actually assemble the final miniature. So just a little recap, any super glue will be absolutely fine. In terms of the tools, you don't have to spend a fortune on them. This stuff is really cheap, things like this. You know, you're talking like £1 in the UK, or probably what, $2 in America. I like the small bottles of glue. I think you have more control with them, but obviously that's down to personal choice and what you can get locally. And clippers or electrical clippers are absolutely fine to remove other parts. Now, I just want to talk to you about sandpaper and what you can do with it. So you can cut the good areas off and stick them onto little lollipop sticks or whatever you've got available, just to give you a flat surface. They're really good if you've got any bits that are just sticking up where they shouldn't on a smooth surface. So for example, the wheel, if there was a piece here, you could carefully move around and slowly clean it all up. Or you can use them on areas like the bottom of the miniature here, where there might be some little casting channels on the bottom of the wheel, so you get a good fit to your base. Again, clip away the excess, take away less, not more, and then sand it down until you get a nice smooth wheel shape. That's about it really. Take your time. If you get stuck, feel free to take a picture, message me on the social channels. I'm more than happy to help people. I'm even happy if someone's really stuck and, you know, to do a quick call and you can show me and I'll talk you through the process. But fundamentally, don't use too much glue and allow your models to dry from part to part. Now, I know I haven't got a professional setup at home in terms of this. I'm using my phone to do this. I hope you've been able to see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. The only other bits to really look at will be things like these flag poles or lantern poles, or, you know, like the dwarf has here. Really, again, as long as you check the fitting, make sure they go in properly. Again, small amount of glue, not loads. If you put loads of glue in there and you try and jam that rod down into the miniature, all the glue will come spilling out. It'll squirt out and it will go all over this rucksack. And we don't want to obscure all these lovely little bits of rope and detail on the back of the miniature. So yeah, less is more with the glue. That's the most important thing. I can't stress that enough. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. You can either get in touch on Facebook if you search for Strata Miniatures. On Twitter, you can always tag me at Strata Minis. Feel free to email me at info@strataminiatures.com. Explain, you know, if you're having any problems, and I will do my best to come back to you in a timely fashion and try and run you through the process. I hope that's been informative, and I hope that's helped you get to grips with how you go about gluing together our range of Dungeons & Diversity miniatures. Thanks very much, and hopefully I'll follow up with some more videos soon.